dynamic ad insertion in live since, I guess, mid-2011. So, 2011 we developed the capability, we started talking to major broadcasters, and our first proof of concept project was actually with ITV at the start of 2012. And when presenting to our board, at that point I believed that every broadcaster would have adopted this by the end of 2012, because why wouldn't you? It's great. You then fast forward on to 2014, which is where we saw the first commercial deployments, so in the UK with STV and in Australia with Network 10. And then on to today, where in the UK every major broadcaster who makes their content available, their live content available as simulcast, is now doing dynamic ad insertion with one level of addressability or another. Fast forwarding into 2017 will be the widest deployed solution for live dynamic ad insertion with deployments in every continent. So I just want to talk a little bit about why it's perhaps taken as long as it has to become a little more mainstream before we go on to look at what's coming next. So firstly, unlike traditional ad tech, so unlike VOD and catch-up TV, if you're doing dynamic ad insertion on live, you really are part of the end-to-end delivery mechanism. So you are integral to the quality of service and the end-user experience. And understandably, that made broadcasters a little nervous when the technologies first came out. They've invested an absolute fortune in ensuring that they're delivering a TV quality experience. And whilst digital ad revenues are becoming increasingly significant, doing anything that's going to jeopardize that user experience really is a major blocker to deploying this sort of technology. It also means that anyone who's working in this space actually needs to understand broadcast. It's all very well being one of the innovative digital businesses, but you need to understand broadcast automation, you need to understand all of the playout systems, the encoding workflows, the DRM, all of the different data sources that need to get through to the ad decisioning platforms to allow addressability. And so it actually really is pretty complicated. And then obviously, there's no point in delivering it if the first time you deliver an event that has a significant audience, the platform falls over. It's not just the coverage you get in the trade press if there's a problem with NFL live streaming. It's also the social media, the brand damage, both for advertisers and also the major broadcasters, mean that you really have to be able to demonstrate that you can do this stuff at scale. And it needs to be a TV quality experience. One of the big differences between doing ad insertion into live, where you're replacing traditional linear breaks, versus catch-up TV with VOD, is in the catch-up space, there's something of an expectation of being able to fast forward through because of the set-top box recording model that people have used. And so even I, who live and breathe this stuff, and so in theory I'm very advertising friendly, if I'm watching catch-up TV and I'm being forced to watch through the ad breaks on catch-up, it grates a little bit in a way that it doesn't with live. With live, you expect to watch through ad breaks because it's an integral part of the broadcast stream. And that's true with OTT, providing the user experience is no different than if you're watching regular television. And then obviously the technology needs to integrate with an ever-increasing number of ad tech platforms. So in the first generation of dynamic ad insertion, it was relatively straightforward. You integrated with an ad decisioning platform, you told it how long the break was, it gave you some ads back, you manipulated the stream, served them into the stream, and as long as you could scale, everything was good. Increasingly, as programmatic platforms come into play, there are a lot more parties that are involved. You need to allow a lot more time for those decisioning steps to take place, for the real-time bidding to take place, for the data that's available to be used to maximize the targeting. And so it gets a lot more complicated. And you need to have an understanding of not just all of the broadcast technologies, but also everything that's going on in the programmatic marketplace. And then fairly obviously, if you can't report accurately on those ad views, then there's not really any point in deploying the technology. So you need to provide all of the sort of measurement that the media buyers traditionally expect. But also the other aspect to this is, if you're streaming a major live event and you have a problem either within the ad decisioning platform or in the programmatic workflow, that means, for example, instead of achieving a 95% fill rate on your breaks, you're suddenly only achieving a 50% fill rate on your breaks, knowing 24 hours later that you had a problem with that fill rate is pretty useless, because the audience has already gone, and yes, you can learn lessons before your next event, but you've lost that monetizing opportunity. So being able to, in real time, actually understand what sort of fill rates you're seeing, what sort of timeouts you might be seeing from the ad servers, what sort of responses you're getting back from the programmatic platforms, so that ad ops teams can respond in between ad breaks, is pretty crucial. I'm pleased to say that today, those problems are largely solved. So where even a year ago, we would still be listing a relatively small number of broadcasters who'd already embraced dynamic ad insertion on live streams. Now, a significant number of broadcasters, these are just the broadcasters that we're working with, but obviously with the other platforms in this space, the majority of broadcasters, particularly those with major sports rights, are actively embracing dynamic ad insertion. And in terms of the types of events that we're delivering dynamic ad insertion into, it's all the major sports events. So we've got the Champions League final coming up on the 3rd of June. I'm not a huge football fan, but I'm reliably informed it's the 3rd of June. We're working with 4 broadcasters in 4 different markets to enable monetization on that Champions League. So obviously the combined aggregate audience for that event is huge, and a big day for us. And it's a testament that major broadcasters now actually trust the technology to deliver at scale, and so I think we're only going to see a continuing acceleration of adoption. So, with that as the backdrop, some of the challenges that still remain, the items across the top there, certainly the first couple are largely solved. So, we've demonstrated reliability at scale. The advantage of server-side ad insertion is it at least simplifies the problem of device fragmentation. So the fact that you're manipulating everything before it's delivered to the device significantly reduces the amount of work that you have to do in the client. And that obviously brings huge benefits to the broadcasters and pay TV operators in terms of getting out onto as many platforms as possible, as quickly as possible. There are still issues with standardization around streaming protocols. Whilst everyone talks about Dash, the reality is that the Dash standard, the components that are key to dynamic ad insertion, particularly for live, have not uniformly been adopted by all of the vendors, so there's still more work to do there. And increasingly, as programmatic comes into play, the whole issue of copy management becomes more and more of an issue. When you're doing purely first-party sales, this isn't an issue. You're able to manage the creative, all of the clearance process, so you can with confidence know that only cleared ads are actually going to be displayed in the stream, and all of the clash management around that is a solved problem. When you start opening that up out into the programmatic space, where there isn't a common ad ID, ad creative will be in play across multiple different platforms. The whole process of firstly ensuring that all of the ads that might be dynamically served into a stream have the correct clearance and are only appearing against appropriate content becomes far more complex. And secondly, particularly for major sports events, you see ad creative that the system believes you're seeing for the first time. In actual fact, it's seen it previously. The ad has to be prepared to be inserted into the stream, and you potentially lose a revenue opportunity simply because there isn't a commonality across all of the different decisioning and programmatic platforms in terms of knowing that a Ford Cougar ad is a Ford Cougar ad regardless of where it's been trafficked from. And then in the programmatic space, it's great that we've got SpotX speaking shortly. We work with SpotX on a number of projects. We've got Sky talking. We've got Group M. So all of the key parties that kind of make what we do necessary are going to be speaking as we move forward. The big challenge from a dynamic ad insertion for programmatic is firstly making sure that the correct data is being passed through to those platforms so that the correct decisions are being made. But secondly is allowing sufficient time for all of the steps around the bidding and decisioning to take place, where potentially the media buyer is 5 hops away from the actual ad decisioning platform. So ensuring that you have a solution that's architected to deliver at scale the ability to serve programmatic advertising. And we're working very closely with both Videology and SpotX to specifically ensure that the combined systems are optimized to achieve that. Because we would say that dynamic ad insertion has come of age, we've decided now's the right time to start doing some research. So we ran a session this morning which was kicking off that research in partnership with MTM, looking at the importance of live TV to simulcast revenues, because obviously that's a very core component of what we do. Where the audiences are coming from, how those audiences will evolve, what the advertisers will expect, and what we can do moving forward to monetize the revenue potential from these kind of live events. So in terms of live sports, to qualify this, because it's a slightly misleading graphic potentially. So this is looking at true live television only, so excluding pre-recorded linear TV. Currently, 68% of simulcast viewing is for live sports. With news and current affairs accounting for the majority of the remainder. Interestingly, during the recent French elections, the sort of traffic that we saw driven by the TV debates on the French elections and the announcements around the various appointments certainly did rival major sporting events. I suspect in the UK, we're perhaps not as politically engaged, and maybe we wouldn't see a similar audience, but it was impressive that those big news events can actually rival sports TV. But given the importance of sports content for live simulcast, clearly understanding how that market is going to evolve and who the key players are going to be is pretty key. We believe that live sports events offer a huge opportunity to the advertisers as well. The ability to be associated with a major premium event certainly remains of interest to advertisers, and the reach that it gives is obviously key. Luxury brands associating themselves with things like the Monaco Grand Prix has been happening for years, and the ability to do more intelligent targeting while still delivering a TV experience is only going to become more and more important. So at the Australian Open, Seven had 16 courts that they were live streaming with dynamic ad insertion into all of those matches with targeting against the user demographic. In terms of the research itself, we're keen to get as many people to get involved. I'm not going to go through this slide in detail. We're keen to get as many people involved as possible. We're looking at trends in live broadcast market in terms of both the proposition to the end users and what the rights holders are doing, how the audiences will evolve, what more we could be doing to offer additional value to the advertisers, and also the role for programmatic in live sports. It's clearly with hugely peaky audiences where potentially 80% of an audience joins in the 5 or 10 minutes either side of kick-off of a Premiership football match, for example. Having an efficient architecture for programmatic is pretty important to ensure that you maintain those full rates. And then obviously looking at what is going to become best practice in this space. So, what are the lessons that we can learn from those broadcasters who adopted this technology early? Looking at some of the leaders from a set-top box perspective in terms of Sky, AdSmart, and so on, and how we can learn from that when we look at OTT. So, as I say, we're keen to have as many people as possible involved in this session. It's work that we're running through to the future of TV advertising in December. So we encourage you to register so that we can include you in some of the sessions that we'll be running across the summer, and obviously we're happy to share the white paper that we produce as a result of that. So I will now hand over to Simon. Thank you very much.